Welcome to The Growing Band Director, the podcast that dives into topics applying to all of us band directors. My name is Kyle Smith, and joining me is my friend and colleague, Jeff Smith. Together, we discuss many aspects of a school band program, including how to build your concert, jazz, and marching programs, as well as everything else we do as band directors. More importantly, we'll discuss concepts that help us all improve our own programs every day. Always remember the famous quote by Ray Kroc, "When you're green, you're growing, and when you're ripe, you rot." Let's get started. All right, so everybody, welcome back to episode 19. This is called How to Improve Your Band Through Singing with Dean Neal. Dean, how are you?
I'm doing great, Kyle. Thanks.
Great. Jeff, what are you up to this morning? You causing any trouble?
No, I'm dog sitting my son's dog while with my two dogs.
Oh gosh.
Well, that's a very auspicious beginning to the recording.
Well, I'm going to hope he jumps back on here in a second.
Oh yeah.
Why don't we keep rolling? And Dean, tell us a little bit about yourself, your history, your past, your teaching, and all that.
Sure. I just finished up actually year number 32 in music education, and I taught for 30 years at Maine Central Institute in Pittsfield, and then the last 2 years I've taught at Nokomis Regional High School in Newport. And when I got into music education in my studies, I was pretty clearly focused that I was going to be a band director. You know, I was like, I'm going to go to school, I'm going to study, and I'm going to be a band director. And then my first job was teaching everything, instrumental, choral, classroom, music, all at the high school level, 9 through 12. And quickly I realized, man, maybe I should have paid attention a little bit better in my keyboarding classes and all that kind of stuff. So, and, but, quickly started to, really focus on not being so much a band director, is just really focus on being a music educator and what that meant for my students and what they needed. And so, so I did everything at the high school level for about 7 years or so. And the program had grown to a point where the school, we advocated to have a second position, and we did get somebody to teach choral music and piano classes. And we had that for quite a few years, about 20 years. And then we had to make some reductions, and I had to go back to doing full band and choir for the last couple of years at MCI. And then for the last 2 years at Nokomis, I've been doing that again. Even though I was kind of focused on instrumental music for those 20 years in between, I continued to do vocal jazz ensembles. So I was very much involved with still vocal teaching, and being an instrumentalist and a vocalist myself in performance. I was still learning, new methodologies and techniques, and so kind of the focus for me as I went along, again, was to try to be as complete a music educator as I could. I remember having a conversation with a parent from another community that was kind of promoting a performance that was going to be in their area. And it was with a classical violinist, and the parent, she was like, it'd be great, if maybe some of the kids, you could have some of your students come, or maybe you could come, I know you're a jazzer, but this thing. And I was like, I kind of for a moment, kind of reined in my immediate, kind of my knee jerk response was to kind of go into like, well, I'm not a jazz. But I kind of tempered that and kind of said like, well, I do enjoy jazz and my students do, but I think they really benefit from all types and styles of music, and hopefully we can bring that. So I've tried to basically incorporate good music education technique and principles, and whether it's my choral classroom or instrumental classroom or my guitar classroom, digital music production, lots of different things that I teach at the high school level.
Yeah, you seem to me like the teacher that the kids really trust, right? And you seem like somebody that I think you're a fantastic teacher in sort of every idiom. I think, again, I wouldn't peg you as a band guy or a choral guy or a jazz guy or anything. I think you're just a teacher, and that's kind of the highest compliment I can give somebody, right? Somebody who's just a really invested teacher, and you feel like your whole life's mission is to take whoever's in front of you that day or that year and help them improve through whatever idiom you have. Am I accurate?
Yeah, I think so. I've said to students many times that if I wasn't teaching music, I would be teaching something. I really feel strongly that teaching is, what I've been called to do. And then they follow that up with, well, what would it be? And I'm like, I really like history and I like physical education. So they're like, what? But no, I really, well, thank you for that compliment. And I really kind of, I guess if there's one thing that I do kind of like strive to do is, be a good teacher, educator,
Right.
whatever idiom that's kind of
well, so oftentimes we hear bands who are just, we would say, loaded, right? There's just all these players, and of course they're going to sound good. There's all these players. You're somebody who I've seen with really good players, but I've also seen your bands perform where they sound amazing, but you can tell that you've crafted every moment of that performance, because what you might have that year is not considered an all-star band, yet they still sound amazing in the end. And that's a testament to your teaching. It's not like there's something in the water where you teach. It's the things that you do to make it really good. I also feel like you're one of the teachers that you could teach fifth grade band. You could teach high school band, middle school band. You could teach college ensembles, right? You could kind of take any level of student and help them improve.
Well, it's interesting. Last year, because of some of the challenges with COVID restrictions and whatnot, and what our staff was called to do, we had a little bit of we did have opportunity to begin our fourth graders. We start in our district in fourth grade with instrumental, music, but our normal staff that would do that, they just couldn't because of the way the schedule was working. And I said, well, what if I do it? I think I can carve out this time, every other day and get over, I had to travel over to the elementary school. And so I was doing beginning band, fourth grade, getting them started on their instruments. And I had a blast. The kids had a great time. I had a great time. I think they learned something. So in the process, but it was, somebody said like, a lot of my high school colleagues in other departments were like, oh man, go fourth grade. What was that like? And I said, oh, those kids are they're just so, it's so fun. They at fourth grade, they are eager to try things, and most of them are, kind of throw caution to the wind and like, let's try this. And so, like they're just sponges, kind of like taking it in. So yeah, I enjoy that. And, that trust part is kind of one of the first things that I wanted to talk about. Actually, you brought up about trust. And I think in anything that we're doing in our classroom, developing that relationship with the students, so that when you say, hey, we're going to do this today, there's always maybe somebody that's kind of thinking like, why or what. So if you've got a good relationship with your students, again, one of the better compliments I've had from a parent and an educator, administrator, when I taught their child was we were chatting one day, I think after Berkeley Jazz Festival one year or something. And he was like, you could ask these students to do anything and they would try it. They would do it. And he commented that like, that's about that, building that trust with them, and working through some things. So
to me, there's something about the performer conductor relationship. You call us conductors when we're in front of the kids, right? Because we have to show emotion and be vulnerable to help them perform well. And then they have to show emotion, be vulnerable. And then when we share that together, that creates like a really cool bond, and I trust is a really good way to put that. Jeff, I have a question for you.
Can I bounce a question off this first before you ask me a question? Yep. So Dean, I always found that when getting the kids' trust was paramount, but then secondarily to maintain that was to make certain I had the trust of the parents. Would you agree with that?
Oh yeah, 100%. And I will say, you know, coming into where I'm teaching now, I'm only in my second year of teaching, but in this school district. But I had the advantage, if you will, of living in this community my whole life. I taught in another school system, but I lived in school community that I'm working in now teaching. So I had actually developed years of relationships and whatnot with parents, or even in some cases grandparents of these kids that I'm teaching now. And as hard as that is to admit, as I'm getting older, but yeah, having that with the parents and the community members, and building that sense that you know, you're there for their kids, you're there to give them the need, you know, the attention, and to do what's needed for them. I think all those communication pieces are really critical. So
And
yeah,
you don't have an ego about doing what you're doing. You're selfless and trying to help the kids. You know, and
oh
your best tool to help the parents trust you is the kids who go home, and you know they're going to say it once a week or whatever. It's like, oh, how's band going? You know, and they're going to be honest with, oh man, Mr. Smith's a jerk or whatever, and that's how, you know, that's how good and bad things start. So if their kid loves you and you're bringing a benefit to the kid's life, the parents are going to love you.
yeah,
And I think some of our younger,
I think there are things that.
Go ahead, Dion.
Well, I think this year what I saw was a lot of interactions with students and parents when there were questions about, you know, whether they were events or calendar issues or any of those kinds of things. You know, I used the phrase this year a lot that, you know, I have a lot of expectations, and sometimes expectations aren't met, and that's okay. But I set high expectations, and then there are certain things that I demand, and a demand is different than an expectation. Mm-hmm. And so, how do we work through those things? And even sometimes we, you know, a student or a family can't meet a demand, and so how do we work through those kinds of conflicts? How do we resolve those? And that communication with parents and students, you know, collectively is so critical. And there were some moments that I thought, oh, how's this going to work out? And when I reached out to parents, or they reached out to me, they worked out well. I would say 99.9% of the time, that when I'm willing, or a parent is willing to reach out and communicate and work through things, they work out well, you know, for the positive, for the student, for me as the teacher, for the parent, and for the program. They really do. Rarely, even in my 32 years of teaching, has it really come to a point where, you know, loggerheads and like the resolution, it really, you know, the program is at a loss, or the student is at a loss, or like it's, you know, my whole goal is to, I know it's not always possible, but my whole goal is to make it a winning situation for everybody. So,
Jeff, you know, having spent your majority of your career down in Connecticut, Dean, you know, I think every area has those teachers who are very versatile and just very quality teachers, no matter what they're teaching. And you would love to hire them anywhere for any position, because you know they do a great job. Do you have any teachers that come to your mind while you were teaching who were similar to Dean in that way?
Yes. John Mastriani. John first taught at Bridgeport Central High School. Then John went on to New Canaan High School. Then John went on to Hall High School. Then he went to Canton High School, became one of the presidential teachers of the year. And now he is a associate professor of jazz studies at University of Connecticut. John is just like Dean. He teaches on all levels, engages all students, and he's a Pied Piper. He gets the trust and the love of anybody who ever works with him. He's just got one of those dynamic personalities that you can't forget. It sticks with you.
And thanks to Jeff's recommendation, he's doing the honors band at Jazz All-State next year.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, I was fortunate. He student taught under me. And as a teacher, I learned a lot from my student teacher. And he was a wonderful influence. And he used to run a jazz camp in Stamford, Connecticut. And I used to send as many of my kids as possible to that in the summer to just have the opportunity to work with him, to be as lightened as him. But I think the thing that he was great about was that when he went to Hall, Hall High School Jazz Orchestra, and his first demand was that everybody must be in concert band if they're going to be in the jazz orchestra. He felt that the concert band had to be the focal point of the program, and then everything branched out from there. And in doing such, he created the Hall High School. We didn't create it, but he made the Hall High School concert band as equally as dynamic as the Hall High School Jazz Orchestra. And then the funny thing is, he left after becoming teacher of the year. He went to Canton, and his first year at Canton goes to Berkeley and is a finalist at Berkeley. And that's the comment you made earlier, Kyle, where Dean can go into a group, not maybe the most dynamic group of individuals, but when it's performance and the time to put it out on the table, they're dynamic just by the way Dean taught them. Well, John was the same way.
Yeah. So we have Dean on because of his expertise, not only in band, but also in choir. And, I think a lot of us use singing with our bands. I think most of us, if we had to take a lie detector test, would like to do it more than we do, because we always, it's one of those things I forget to do enough. And, as a musician, when I was in high school, Dean, you went to Nokomis High School, right?
Yes, I did.
I went to South Portland High School. Jeff, where did you go to high school?
Norwalk High School, where I taught it, just like you guys.
So both of you taught where you went to school. That's awesome.
Eventually,
right. When I was in high school, I remember being 19th trumpet in District 1 for my freshman year. I made honors band, but I was like chair number 19. I think they just wanted to let me in. I don't know why, but 19. And then the choir teacher pulled me aside and said, "You're going to sing in chorus. Can you match pitch?" And I said, "I don't know." I'm like a 14-year-old boy. She said, "Well, can you match this pitch?" And she doesn't know. And of course I don't sing it. So then she was brilliant in the way that she found my note, right? So I was singing a note and she found it on the piano and then got me to feel what that was like to match the pitch. So she went to my range, and the note I was on was probably F or something. And then she moved me up and down with the piano. And then she decided that, then she let me be able to match pitch within an octave or so. And so to make a long story longer, I was able to join chorus and then select choir and chamber singers and a barbershop quartet. And within 18 months, I had made first chair trumpet in the state. So, I wasn't a vocal performer, but that whole getting the music inside, being able to perform it vocally, that changed everything about playing the trumpet. Now the trumpet was just an organ, like a tool to make the music, but the music was really in my head. And, it's also a great life lesson to make first trumpet and then the next year make seventh trumpet and feel like you got better, but you got a worse placement. So that was fun. So, if people are not used to the singing portion of the musicianship, I think it's a huge deal. So if you have a program where your students can sing in chorus as well as singing in your band, right, that's going to improve your band immensely just by doing that. So let's dive into a little bit the tools you use, Dean, in a band rehearsal. Let's go specifically concert band or jazz band rehearsal vocally.
Sure. So I don't have a lot of students at the moment that are crossing over between the concert choir and the concert band. Not a lot. Scheduling is tough in a lot of our schools. But I do see that number increasing. Last year there were virtually none. This year there were 3 or 4, and next year I think that'll be even more by the looks of it. So, and that requires sometimes like independent studies and doing different things to make that work. But that's a great thing when you can have them in both ensembles, because they're gaining skills in both areas that are going to benefit each other consistently. But for the majority of the kids in band, they're not in choir. They're not singing, in an organized manner. So the first thing really First of all, let me back up and say, I always used it in some way, the singing in band. but I never used it enough. Even as you said, like it's something there and like, okay, let's all sing this pitch or hum this pitch. And then we go on and we kind of forget about it. But then I think it was about 4 years or so ago, I couldn't make it to the University of Maine for a flute master class, but I was really interested. The flutist's name was Robert Dick. And so I looked up a video following, and he was talking a lot in this particular series that he was doing on throat tuning on flute. And he was talking about singing through his instrument and how that helped his sound and intonation and everything. And I thought, that's a really interesting way of stating that we are singing through our instrument. And when I started, and I thought, I'm going to go back and really start to make a concerted effort to incorporate this into my rehearsals, whether it's in warm up or just in the rehearsal process, if we're having some intonation issues with this passage or this pitch, and how can I introduce that? So the idea of singing through our instrument. And I've always said to my students, we know that music is such a strong connection with brain functioning and problem solving and processing. But I always say that, when I sing, I cannot rely on any buttons or valves or anything to push. Everything's got to be my brain processing it. And the better that it does that with regard to all of the musical components that we're applying, the better I can do it in vocalizing it, I feel like it's even stronger when I bring that to my instrument. So in starting that for our wind players and even our percussion students, starting that out, I start really simple. And at first I try not to use the term sing, because for some of them that can be a little bit, intimidating.
Right.
Stigmatizing. I go back to one of my students a few years ago in his senior year. We started doing this a lot in his senior year. And I remember Marisa Weinstein, who's a fantastic music educator in the middle school at Warsaw Middle School, who again can teach anything, said, "Oh my gosh, how did this student react?" Because in middle school, I said, "We're going to sing this pitch." And that student said, "I'm quitting." So when they were in like 5th grade or something like that, 5th or 6th grade or 7th grade, they were like, "I'm not singing. I didn't join band to sing. I don't sing." So one of the ways that I kind of skirt that in the beginning is I say, okay, we're going to vocalize this. I kind of take the word sing out. I mean, if truly singing was as simply as us open our mouth and it comes out and it's just amazing, then that's quite a disservice to the world of choral and vocal education, that ta-da, we're all singing now. And yet I truly believe that anyone can sing. How we improve the quality of that and everything is a whole other thing.
Well, there's a quick story about people being tone deaf.
Yep.
People say that, what percentage of people are actually tone deaf? People think that because you can't match pitch right now that you're tone deaf. But the two examples that Ben Zander uses is when you're driving a stick shift car, right? When you hear the engine rev, when it's to that point to shift, right? And the other one he says is when your mom calls on the phone, you can hear one word. And not only do you know it's your mother, you know what kind of mood she's in, right? So we have fantastic ears. It's a matter of getting our physical body to produce what our ears know. And you're talking about vocalizing, like all the same things that make a good vocal tone are the same things that make a good instrumental tone. If your tongue's in the wrong spot, if your throat's closed, if there's tension, your jaw, all the things, they all transfer right over.
Absolutely. So I start from there, and it's just, so even thinking back, for many of the students, this was new last year was a very different year, obviously, with all of our restrictions. This year was back to more somewhat normal, I would say. It still wasn't really 100%, but as it got back to more normal, I started to introduce these things to these students because it was new to them. And so I would say, okay, we're gonna make this pitch, and we'd start with unison, just to simplify it. And if I did use the word sing, I would say I don't care about your tone or any of that right now. I'm trying to take out the stigma of how good do I sound or how bad do I, that is not it at all. So, and I very clearly state to them that I know this isn't chorus, but just go with me. And again, this goes back to our first talk about trust. If I have a relationship with them, then that's positive, and that they trust me, and that when I ask them to do something, that that they're able to get there. I don't start with this also at the very beginning of the year. And that's because for many of the students who are new to our band, that's not a hip way to start. Like, that's not a good foot to start on, because our voice is very personal to us. Mm-hmm. So it's one thing, my instrument is personal, but it's not my voice. It's an extension of that, but my voice is mine. And so people get really kind of closed about that. And so I wait a little bit before introducing it, several weeks. But when I do introduce it, at that point, I already introduced a lot of other new things to the kids. And so I've kind of taken them through the process, and they understand that when we do new things, I help to establish what's the purpose in it. So even when I ask them to vocalize, it's usually in a unison pitch. I even ask them to find the octave that's comfortable with them. Mm-hmm. But as an educator, I need to be able to demonstrate. So I might ask them to start on a unison concert B flat. So as hearing it, and then I would ask them to vocalize that and just humming it first. Right. Or if and then when we move to a vocalization of that outside of humming, then I ask them to do it on ah, and I just have them produce it ah, or in their, depending on the range that they're singing in, ah. So I have to be comfortable as an educator vocalizing that in my, what we'd call full or chest voice, yep, or in my falsetto or head voice. And so I think that helps for the maybe the female or high voice part singers in our band, that they can hear it in a register that clicks in their brain about where that is. And for the lower voice singers, that we can do that for them too.
And when you have them hum, that's like, you're kind of keeping it inside more. They can hear it well. It's not as out there. So that's a good intermediate step.
It's a great beginning step, because again, we would do that in all of our vocal warm-ups. I don't engage the vocal folds, our vocal cords, without doing humming or a lip trill kind of exercises first as singers. So as instrumentalists, I'm not going to ask them to do it either. I'm going to want them to just to get the vocal cords going. And again, it's way less intimidating to do right. that.
And so, Dean, as you start on B flat, have you ever seen teachers who have the kids memorize B flat so that the first thing they do in the morning is they sing that? In my choir, most of the exercises that I do, I start from B flat and then I move them to other keys. And in concert band, we kind of do similar kind of thing. I've not really kind of been a big, I haven't harped on the memorized B flat thing. It's funny. I say it because I was observing. My wife and I went down to Fairfax County and watched Linda Gammon teach at Rachel Carson Middle School. And what was great was that, she walked in and it was like, all right, let's hum B flat. And they all went, they hummed it right away. And we were just shocked. Like, how does this happen? And she said, it's pretty simple. If you do it a couple days in a row and then you find it, like the third or fourth day, they'll have it. And it's not this special thing. And it was just a tool. So we went home and tried it. And sure enough, within a week, the band could hum B flat. And then you can start singing all these exercises you're going to talk about, even before you play.
Yeah. It's in the choral group, I think it's there. First of all, my choral group, my concert choir is, it's open enrollment. So it's not a select choir. And so there are kids in there that absolutely, we do those exercises every day and do more, and they can 100% do it. And then there are students that need more time to develop that skill. I think the similar thing would, occur for the band in doing that. But yeah, so it just starts with that unison pitch. We stay in what would be considered a comfortable range. So I stay initially, if we do any movement, it's just maybe within a range of a fifth. I don't worry about completing an octave early on. That's not my goal at all, because I want them to understand that what I'm not trying to do is especially in band, is to get them to be singers yet. That's, again, there are a lot of kids that might respond negatively to that because they didn't join to be in choir. So I do have to manage, you know, how much time we spend with it, you know, how the frequency of it. And to me, that's just about kind of knowing your students and kind of being able to kind of put that in strategic moments that I can talk more about when we talk about going from warm-ups to repertoire.
Right. That's great. So let's keep going. What's next?
Yeah, it's to me. So one of the things, once we've established to me that idea or that sense of we can vocalize, we can make the pitch, we can find the pitch, you know, match the pitch, that we can move that pitch. So we might do a moving line of a major scale, just 3 steps. So I might have them move with that. Initially, I don't even worry about solfege. Again, I don't want them thinking like, wait, I'm not in choir. So initially, I don't concern myself with that for them.
Do you use like numbers 1, 2, 3 of the scale? How do you get them to move?
1, 2, 3. We can move 1, 2, 3. Yep, as we move. Or I might be playing it on my instrument as they're vocalizing it. So I use that as a model.
So you're another teacher who has your horn or a horn at the podium when you teach.
Yes.
Yes. I you know, Phil Snedeker is a great trumpet performer and teacher. I think he's down at Hart School of Music. He came up and did some lessons for our kids. And he noticed that my trumpet was near the podium. And he said, you know what? I can already tell you're a good teacher because your trumpet is near the podium. And it's not that you're a trumpet player, but you're demonstrating all the time for your kids what a good quality sound is. He's like, the amount of teachers and band rooms I go into and the instrument is nowhere near the podium.
If it's not set up in front of the podium, it's sitting behind me in my case, because last year I made the mistake of leaving it set up on my trumpet stand and it got knocked over and slight damage on my trumpet. So I kind of keep it right there, but it is handy. And it's funny because I find myself using it when I'm in teaching mode. And my students now it's funny because they kind of, when they give their response, it's almost like a cult kind of response. They kind of drone the answer back, because I'll say, do you know what the difference is between teaching and directing? And they'll go, yes, we do. And I said, well, and so teaching, that you're engaging with asking questions and getting feedback and then what's directing? And they're like, you just tell us what to do and we do it. That's right. Directing. And so, yeah, so I love teaching, but those, you know, when we get close to performance time, there's very little time. And so I usually say to them, okay, I'm going into directing mode. And they go, okay. And so we have very little time. I need you to do these things. But I love teaching mode because I get to model, I get to demonstrate, I get to ask questions, I get to give examples. Yes, playing on my instrument is a big part of that. And one of the biggest reasons for having them sing, vocalize, and sing pitch is it strengthens their intonation so quickly. And the best example I can point to this anecdotally didn't even come from my own students. It came when I guest conducted a 5th grade elementary band festival. And we had these 80 5th graders that had never played together and had only been playing that year, or for schools that started in 4th grade, you know, so it was like, there may have been 5th and 6th actually combined together. So they only had about a year of experience on their instruments. And of course, it can be a little, you know, a bit of a cacophony of sound when you have that. And so this was about 4 years or so ago when I was like making a really focused effort that I'm going to have the students sing in band and vocalize. And so I went to this festival completely with the intention to do this. And at some point, and so we had already gotten started with our day and we rehearsed for a couple of hours. And of course, you know, most everything we were doing wasn't really in tune. So I busted it out and I was like, okay, you know, kids, let's sing this pitch together. And you can, and again, they're very young. So I couldn't just in my voice go, you know, do, because these kids are like 10 years old. And so I was like, make that pitch wherever you want to make it. And these fifth and sixth graders are all, you had all these kids' voices going, with, and so we stopped and I said, let's do it again. And so I made the pitch. They answered back. And I said, let's do it one more time. We're just going to hold it out. We did it one more time. Okay. So now let's do it on your instruments. It was as though and all of that took 30 seconds, 40 seconds. It was as though we had just spent 15 minutes going around the room, one kid to the next, tuning, push in, pull out, you're sharp, you're flat, pull in, put, all those things you'd have to do with kids.
Yeah, it's almost like they matured a full year in
their intonation. It was, I wish that I had recorded the process because it was so profoundly distinct. It wasn't just simply, I think they sound better. I think it was almost hard to believe how immediate their pitch, their intonation improved as an ensemble, as a group of students, having done that exercise for literally 45 seconds and then putting their instrument back in their mouth or on their face and executing that same pitch after vocalizing it for those few seconds. It was profound. So to me, if your band seems to struggle with intonation, you're in a lyrical piece, a tone piece, a sound piece, and you're like, man, we just struggle with intonation as we play this. Vocalize, get them to vocalize their pitch. Even if it's not, for advancing students, you can do that through a phrase when you've really worked and you can have them vocalize a phrase or a chord. But just from the fundamental level of are we really truly hearing our pitch? Or am I'm picking up my horn, I'm pushing down the buttons, and that note comes out and it's like, so then that's where I do go in and demonstrate. So I'm like, it does it? So I'll go, real so we can make lots of sound from one set of buttons or one set of fingers. So, what do we hear in our brain before we've even made the pitch? Right. And then when we're analyzing it. So,
there's a common denominator, sorry to interrupt you, but there's a common denominator with bands who play in tune and play with good tone. It's not rocket science. Their teachers just insist on it. Right. It's just we don't wait until the week before the concert to work on the tone. It's like an all the time thing.
It's right from the beginning. It's paramount to in the choral side of things. I remember reading an opening, article in Professional Development at the beginning of a year, and the college professor was talking about how when they introduce a new piece of choral literature, they talk about the lyrics immediately and what the piece means and what the meaning is behind the lyrics before they've even sung a note, so that they are going into it already with a sense of how they should be approaching the piece. So, and yet a lot of times we take a piece of music out with our band students and we're like, we're going to sight read this. Here's the time signature. Here's the key signature. We're going into it all the very important technical aspects, but what are some of the interpretive things that if we took a moment also to say, here's the intent of this piece. Here's the purpose of this piece musically. How much better would they start sounding out of the gate as well? And I'm convinced that when I do take that time, that they do sound better. Interestingly enough, in my first year of teaching, budgetary things being what they were when I first started teaching at the school that had, hadn't established itself as a music program. It was just getting started. We didn't have a tuner our first year. We tuned to the piano our entire first year. And then we tuned to each other. So we had to listen to each other for everything, for all of our information. And I still remember that. And my takeaway now is great, we have a tuner and we'll go through tuning, sure, when we need to. And then I'll usually follow it with saying, great, we just used the tuner. Are we done tuning? And the kids will shake their heads. No. Now they'll shake their heads and they'll drone. No. And they're like, how come we're not done tuning? And they'll say, because every note and every phrase requires listening as we tune. So every time. And so that's why I always say, also why I say music, playing music, singing, it's the best brain developing thing that we can do, because every time we do something, we go from executing it to analyzing it and how we're going to execute the next thing. And it all happens almost instantaneously. And for a good musician, that is happening so rapidly. And for the developing musician, it's so important to hold them to that expectation that it needs to be in tune. So we go from singing in, or vocalizing and singing in unison pitch to like my band, they know which voice parts they are in the band: soprano, alto, tenor, or bass. And we talk about it, we're a choir of sound, which instruments are soprano, alto, tenor, and bass. And then they're assigned a chord tone in a triad. And so when we do a key, I'll say, okay, play your chord in this key based on your SATB voicing. And ta-da, we play a chord. Bum, bum, bum. We play 1, 3, 5, whichever step of the scale, depending on their voice part. So when we develop their skills, we go from having them vocalize a unison pitch. And when we're playing a chord and I'm like, that is not in tune, like that chord, I'll have them vocalize the note, the pitch that you are supposed to be playing. Can you vocalize it as we play a chord? Because some students, unison, they're like gangbusters. They're like, yeah, unison, I'm playing and it's great. And the moment they go into a harmony line, their intonation just goes out the window. Why? Well, they're not relating it to the other pitches, and the relationship's not right. So to me, that's back to their listening, their ear training, and how we train that. And to me, I have them vocalize it. And again, the improvement is almost immediate. And honestly, I use those chords I rely on those more for tuning than I do a tuner for tuning, actually. I only resort to the tuner when, that student, I won't even mention an instrument because it could be any instrument. When that student, there's something up with the length of their instrument, or their embouchure needs some significant attention because we've tried everything listening and it's just not happening.
Right.
So, yeah.
Great.
Have you ever found that, I know for many high school band directors, their school year has to start with marching band, and that's an opportune time to use vocalizing when playing. And what I used to do was I would get a recording of, specifically, I usually get Gino Cipriano's recording of Carolina Crown doing their warm-up arc, where they'd be playing chords and everything, and then they'd sing. And I'd play it for the kids at the very beginning of the season and say, this is the way to really get a good sound. And so then we'd be outside and we'd go outside and say, listen, remember, if Carolina Crown can do it, our little high school can do it. And we'd start getting in arcs and we'd play something and then we'd sing the unison. And as you said, to build the chord and then eventually build to the phrase. And then when we got near the end of the marching season, when we had to practice a lot to get ready for whatever championship we're playing for, we'd, instead of just doing air and valves, we'd do singing and valves. And we'd play the whole show, marching the whole show, singing it. Drummers would play with their fingertips on their drums so we could hear a good balance. Mallet players would just use the erasers from pencils and play on their mallet instruments, so they wouldn't get they'd get the opportunity to play. And you could talk about the singing. Well, when you sang that chord there, did it sound like what we wanted? And they'd say no. And then we talk about, just as you said, and that took a lot of fear about singing away, because they didn't realize that they had watched the video. And of course they watched the video a lot. So it sort of got in their head that that's a good thing to do. And it took away a lot of that animosity that you talk about that you need to build within the group, and learning to tune, because as you said, you can adjust the length of the horn to get it all match up. But the minute you start playing repertoire, you've got to be listening to the phrases and all the notes to fit them in together. And if you're in an outdoor setting, well, then you have that added little effect of temperature that people have to adjust to that no tuner in the world is going to fix for you.
Yeah. I point out to the kids, I show them my trumpet and I show them my tuning slide, and I point out this tuning slide. I mean, it moves, but it's been in the same place pretty much for most of my life as an adult trained musician, because that's where it is for me in tune. And I don't move it much unless, weather conditions are such that it necessitates it. The rest of it is me making immediate adjustments, whether it's air or embouchure or all of those things. But I know to do that because of what I'm listening for. And I know to do that because of how, as I said, I've performed a lot as an instrumentalist, but also as a vocalist. So I think I'm very comfortable with that, but I also know that I rely on how I vocalize. And then when I attach it to my instrument, it just becomes that much stronger.
I think sometimes the most we move our tuning slide is when we're going to play a church gig with some older singers, and we push all the way in before we're going to play in unison with the sopranos, right?
Yeah, it's just kind of present. And I think even as you were saying, Jeff, how you use that in your rehearsals, to me in the classroom, it becomes, again, I wouldn't necessarily have this as I wouldn't necessarily say like every day I have maybe scale exercises and articulations and these warm-ups. The part of every day vocalizing is minimal as far as an organized, structured, this is the time we do it. That's minimal to me. It's present, but it's not very lengthy. What is consistently done is that in the rehearsal that you're quickly turning to it for as a quick pedagogical technique. So we're in the rehearsal and we're playing that phrase from a piece of music, and we're like, oh, that wasn't in tune. Trumpets, let's vocalize that pitch for me on that, and here it is. And you're like, great, yeah, great. Can trombones? Can I hear you vocalize that with them? And then you move back into your playing of it, and so you're kind of what your goal is. My goal is to kind of have it become a seamless part of your teaching, just like any other part of, okay, that rhythm's not right. Let's clap and count that. Okay. Sure. I do that as an exercise before I do our class. As we start it as a warm-up, we do rhythm exercises, but I don't spend 10 minutes clapping and counting rhythms every class. I do a short segment and then we're on. But in my class time of rehearsing, it's woven into it. So to me, how do you weave in the vocalizing and the singing? And that's an awareness, even as Kyle said right at the beginning, it's something that we think about doing, and then we realize, oh, I really don't do that as much as I could or should. And I even, as much as I'm aware of it, I still find myself thinking, oh, I could have saved myself a lot of headache if I just had them sing or vocalize that little phrase or that pitch. And it's applicable. We've been talking primarily about concert band. This is something that's applicable in any genre or medium that you're playing. In the jazz ensembles, I do the same thing in the big bands. And I think that's one of the things that's helps to lead to better intonation quicker in that small ensemble, is that, and they tighten up rhythms a little bit quicker as we sing those things together. To me, it just really gets at the heart of like what's in their head. How are they interpreting this sound? And takes out of the way any of the technical facilities that they may be lacking, or if I'm thinking that I'm working with the saxophone section on articulating a passage, let's say it's and if I'm articulating, saying to the saxophones, oh, we're not articulating it, let's do that slower, and we do it slower, and they still don't articulate it right. Have I even had them sing it to find out how they're even thinking it sounds before approaching the instrument, because that could be the bigger problem, not that they've got this horn and that it's technically difficult, or the fingering passage. It just may be, to begin with, they don't even have a concept of what this sounds like. So, and then with vocalizing it, whether it's concert band or whether it's jazz, I think some of the things that we get into is articulating it. What sounds are we using articulating it? Whether it's their clear t, 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 or just the breath behind it. In jazz, I have them articulate when we sing, ba-doo, ba-doo, ba-doo. So it's important in jazz that they articulate it in syllables with the syllables that will connect with the articulation. So I talk a lot about that with them and work at that, and it's slowly, and it's in really simple phrases to begin with. In jazz studies, for instance, I would have them vocalize. I talk about in every other articulation to begin with as a study, da 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 da, just to slowly get that idea of tongue slur. And I, whether it's jazz or whether it's concert literature, the sound we're using as we vocalize really then connects to the articulation that they'll use in their playing.
It's funny, it's something you said, you're talking about being able to use it seamlessly as a tool. You make it the correlation to any tradesperson. Take a plumber. How many tools do they have in their kit when they show up to the job? They don't know what the issue is going to be. They're there to fix a whatever, and they're not just going to use a hammer because they have a hammer. They're going to use it when they need to use it. They're going to use a screwdriver when they need to use it, and all those things. So, we're the same way. So you're right. Those master teachers who can just say, "Oh, I'm going to seamlessly use this," and then people who are watching might go, "Wait a minute, I have no idea what you just did. That was awesome." And when we first learn how to use it, we make it a big deal that we're using it. But then the more experience you get using it, you just take it out and use it when needed, and then put it away, and nobody even knows.
Well, I also think as you gain more experience, to use your analogy of the plumber or the carpenter, I just did a dishwasher installation for my niece yesterday. So when you have done things for a number of years, if that's your trade, you've accumulated a lot of tools, a lot. As you accumulate more tools and more things, there may be some things that you forget where they are, or I put that somewhere, or it's not as handy, but you've got your kind of like your go-to tools are in your main bag or bucket. And as educators, as we teach more, we've seen a lot of different techniques and methodologies and strategies. We have our go-tos, and then we might see something new and go, oh my gosh, yeah, but how do we continue to be focused in what we use, and be effective in all that we use? Right. And that, to me, that becomes about having a real clear plan when you go into a classroom, not kind of like, today, today, I have band today. Oh yeah, we've been working on this repertoire. That's what we're doing today. Well, what are you doing today? Like, what passage from that piece, and what are you focusing on that passage in that piece? That helps to keep you focused, so that when you do encounter problems, now you're not trying to reach from a whole shop full of tools, because in the moment you need your go-to bucket of tools. Right. And so having focused lessons and classes, rehearsals planned is a really, really big key. And our students appreciate that too, that focus. I don't write on the board. I write on the board, and so that they see it every day that they come to class. It's written out which pieces and on which sections, and what specifically are the concepts that we're dealing with on those sections. And they may be 2 or 3 in a particular day. I don't write in there, we'll be vocalizing measure 22 on this, because I don't necessarily know if that's going to be needed or not. It might be, but I still have to be, as the educator, I have to be prepared that's maybe a necessity. But if it's not something I've worked on or used before, I may not even try to pull it out of my bag. So it does take practice. I feel like maybe I have a little advantage over somebody that's not vocally doing work consistently because I do use that part of my brain and teaching every other day. I'm doing vocal one day essentially, and I'm doing the instrumental another day. And some days they kind of get thrown in together when I have two vocal jazz ensembles and a big band on the same day after school or something. So,
Right.
But I think becoming, allowing yourself to try new things. A great example of that is we had Steve Massey, right? Was for All-State Jazz, wasn't he, a few years ago?
He was. I think it was 7 or 8 years ago now.
Yeah, and then he came back a year or two later and did a clinic, like a session at Jazz at All-State Conference, and he spoke about a particular way that he used rhythm studies, and I mean, it was the way he presented it was in a way that I hadn't really seen or heard before. For whatever reason, it struck me in a particular way, and I immediately went back to my school and to my students and said, we're doing this right now. And my students were like, they groaned and they were like, and then the next year, because that's in the spring for Maine's All-State, the next year we started out the year and I was like right back on it. And the kids kind of like, oh, this again. And I've never strayed from using them. That was, several years ago, and it stuck with me and I use it every time. But the interesting thing is I asked my students as we finished the year and did reflections, I asked them about those kinds of exercises and our fundamentals books and those things that we use as daily reading studies and whatnot. I asked them, you can be 100% honest. It's not going to, offend me. Do you find these effective and in what ways? And to a student, they all found positive things from doing those. And to me, one of those things was that they pointed out was using singing and vocalizing, it's effective, that it helps them. It may not be the thing that is their go-to for them personally as a thing that they enjoy doing, but they see the value in it. They see the results of it. And I think in part because then they see the results, that there's easier buy-in the next time. And as that continues to go on, then you come into a new year, you've got new kids that are like, what? And the older students are like, it's fine. Don't worry. It's fine. It's not a big deal.
That's part of the culture that you've built.
Yeah. Yeah.
Could I emphasize one thing that Dean said? You talked about putting on the whiteboard that for each day, what you're going to work on, but then you incorporate the vocalizing whenever you see it as a necessary tool to use to fix something. Having worked with super student teachers and everything, I think that's an important thing to point out to all teachers. You need to have on your board, your whiteboard, what the goals are of the day so that the students can see clearly what you want to accomplish, so that there's a communication rather than you having to say, okay, get out this piece. They walk into the classroom, they see we're going to work on this, these measures, they know and they're focused. And I think that has lessened in many of the classrooms I've walked in, where I'm walking in either on a student teacher, which they got the hint they had to do it, or watching the cooperating teacher and all I see is a blank board up there and they're teaching and then the student teacher kicks in. We need to reemphasize that being a band director or a choral director or an orchestra director, you don't pull the trick out of the bag at the beginning of class. You have to have your lessons done, written out, so you know what you want to do for each day, so you can make a progression and growth. And I think that was an outstanding point in how you talked about building the vocalizing into it when it's a needed tool to fix a situation. So I just wanted to emphasize that. I thought that was outstanding. My students
I think they get so used to it that even some of them are we're all creatures of habit. But I distinctly remember my movable whiteboard. I had to move it to my other side. In my previous classroom, it was on my left, so the student's right. And for whatever reason, one day, space in the room, I had to move it to the other side. And a student walked in and looked to the left and went, "Where's the board?" And they looked to the other side like, "Oh, there it is." Oh, phew. I they they really do come in and start to look. And actually so much so that I had one class day, and I didn't really think much about it. It was the day before a concert. And I had just simply written what our program was for the concert the next day. And so, here are the pieces. And I just, and one of the students sat down and they said, "Oh, you don't have anything written out next to the pieces." And I said, "You are right. Thank you for pointing that out to me." And I went to the board and but in my mind, initially, I was like, of course they know it's the day before, that we're going to play through the program and we're going to go back and we're going to do this. And I thought, but they kind of know that, but we still need those reminders. Like, this is where we're going. So I found myself after that in the subsequent performances through the year, when we had the day before, I'd still like, here's the program order. Here's what we're going to stop and assess and reevaluate. And I would write that on the board. And, I think one of the younger students actually commented one day, "Do you plan out each of these days?" like, what do you mean? Like, it's all written here on the board. Do you think like I just like seconds before you walk in, I like write it down on the board and like throw it? Like, yeah, I mean, you have to think about it. Plus I teach like 8 or 9 performing ensembles and 2 or 3 other, non-performing classes. I'm not that good. I just can't.
You have to plan ahead.
I can't.
I had a couple thoughts. One is something you reminded me of, and then the second one was something that you and I talked about at District 5 at that Honor Band Festival, and I was fascinated by it. And I'm hoping we'll be part of this conversation. Also, for anybody who's in District 1 here in Maine, Dean, I believe you've agreed to do our honor band next year, District 1 concert band.
Yeah, this is gonna be great.
And what are we doing for repertoire? One Beautiful Life.
Yep, One Beautiful Life.
Beautiful Life.
And yep, Julie Drew. I should know that was Foundry, John Mackey. John Mackey's Foundry. And
hold on, let me look real quick. I have it.
I thought so. I thought John Mackey's Foundry, and a Spanish March, Amprurito Roca.
That's right.
Jaime Tesidor. So
yep. So anyway, what I thought of was, you were talking about the playing through of the performance, and many of us play through the day the day of, and that's very valid. One thing I found is about 3 or 4 weeks ahead of the performance, I try to do that as well. Because so often when you're working everything, the kids don't know what it's like to play piece 1, 2, and 3, or 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, or however many you have. And I've actually had times where you go through and it's not concert ready, but it's, at 75, 80, 90%. And you go through it and all of a sudden the kids click as to what the purpose is. And then there's other things that are issues that you didn't think were issues. And some stuff takes care of itself. And sometimes even that you're like, the concert order is wrong. Like, in my head, this was the concert order, but now as we actually do it, we should switch piece A and piece B. And that's usually fun when those kids get to come in and they get to just perform that day, and it's a nice mix up too. Sometimes that works the Friday, like 2 weeks before the performance or something like that.
Well, the other reason that's a good idea is that when we're going into every class with that set of, here's what we're going to work on, and here's my goal, and here's my focus, we do become kind of a little bit of tunnel vision with what we're hearing and seeing and recognizing. And so I can find myself sometimes, usually it's the more experienced, older students that they'll bring to my attention, like, "Oh, Mr. Neal, I think that there's a thing here that we missed." I'm like, "Oh, that's great that you brought that up, because I was so focused on this other element that it was there. I just, my brain didn't process it. So thank you." So I do think that we can go into rehearsals with a plan, with these things, and we can miss some things sometimes because there's a lot there to get. So kind of doing a playthrough and in a way, having our minds open to what am I going to take away from this gives us a chance to kind of reassess. It's in a way, it's very much like what happens when you're conducting a festival. Because in a festival, you go in, here's what we're going to work on. But after, a bit, you're going to do kind of like a run through, and you kind of reassess. This is where we're at on this piece. I just need to hear where we're at, and then I can make a plan for how I'm going to go through this afternoon or tomorrow. And so in our own classes, we do need to, as the educator, we need to kind of step back and be those non-judgmental ears for a moment, so we can just kind of take it in and go like, that's what's happening there. Yeah.
The other thing that you were talking about when we were together this winter was your use of chord tones 1, 3, 5, and 7. You were using it in jazz choir, but also in band, where the kids would be given a certain pitch and they'd sing the major 7 chord, and you'd move one note down at a time to create different qualities of chords. I know that's a very advanced thing. And then the whole thing could kind of descend throughout. And you were also talking about using, like, you play the 1 and the 5, and then you sing the 1 and the 5, and then you play the 1 and the 5 and you sing the 3, and then you play the 1 and the 3 and then sing the 5, all those sorts of things. So could you talk a little bit about that whole approach?
Right. So, this speaks to ear training and really advanced students. So absolutely one of the things I love doing in the choral group is this warm up and I call it chord tuning. So, the basses and the altos are assigned the root of a triad, of a triad. We start with a triad. And so the basses and the altos are on the root, the tenors are on the 5th, and the sopranos are on the 3rd. And it's voiced 1, 5, 1, 3 is the voicing. And I usually start on a concert F chord with the vocal group. It's usually pretty comfortable. And then from that, it's a descending line, the soprano line, the 3rd, the descending line, it goes down. The root, the altos go down first, and they then form a major 7th, and then they go down again and they form a dominant 7th. And then the sopranos go down and they form a minor 7th chord. And then the altos go back up a half step, the sopranos stay where they are, and the tenors and basses go down a half step, and we start the whole thing over again. So it basically works its way through this major 7, dominant 7, minor 7 sequence, and then we're back to a major triad. What's really interesting is with the advancing students, when you've gone from simply saying, here are your chord tones in the band, your soprano, alto, tenor, bass, when you can advance to that point where, okay, let's play that major chord all together. Great. Then you can actually indicate to your band half step motion,
right,
and movement. And so you can start to hear these chords develop in your band. One of the things that it helps them to work on chromatics, because they're moving half steps. They're hearing chords in every key and all this kind of motion. That's from their playing, like on their instrument standpoint. If you can advance your students to the point instrumentally where they're singing a triad, that's awesome. Fantastic. If you want to try, I think these kids in this band, I think they're really clicking. Then you can try doing that kind of motion, that half step movement. I think what I've found is that when I've tried to do that in my ensembles, instrumental ensembles, it's been very difficult to do that in my large, 60 instrument ensemble, because of those half step motions. In my smaller ensembles, like a jazz ensemble, it's been very much more attainable.
Would you do it with a projected piano or something where you can play the pitch and have them help too?
You can in the choir, when I started in the beginning of the year, it's always accompanied at the start. So the piano's playing with them as they move on the pitches. I'm conducting it. It's being played. And then after a few weeks, we take away that piano and try it a cappella. Usually that first a cappella attempt early in the year, even chorally, because we got a lot of new students, it's an adventure. And we don't get very far. We maybe move 2 or 3 chords a cappella.
Well, what's funny too is it feels like there's a simpler way to do that too, that might work, is if you just took the triad right? And then you move the third down and then move the fifth down to make the diminished chord.
Yep.
And then you move the bass down and all of a sudden it's a major chord again.
Correct. So you could do it if you just wanted a triadic motion, then you could absolutely do it that way as well. So again, the benefit is huge ear training, like benefit for your ensembles, really tremendous. And it just honestly, at first, it can seem confusing to the kids. This is again where it sits on my board for the whole year, that motion in my choral classroom. I write it at the beginning of the year. Here's your motion or movement, and it stays there. So that it never moves. In the same way, at the beginning of the year in the band room, I write SATB and I write 1, 3, 5, 1. I write their step designation, and it never moves off that board for the whole year. So, they have a place to look and they have a place to go. And so as their ear training improves, we can do things like you said. You can have your chord played. Okay, let's everybody play our chord that plays the root in the fifth. Nobody play the third. You soprano voices don't play the third. So they're playing the root in the fifth, and then I'll ask, can you sing the third in that chord? Can you place that third in there? And we can do all those kinds of little games and activities as a way for advanced students maybe to demonstrate stronger ear training skills. And then still giving them a point of reference, I think is important as they continue to grow that. So either we're doing it with some of our instruments, or we have a piano there. I know my teaching, I have my horn right there. There is a piano in my room that's off to the side that if I need it, I go over to that and I'll play it if needed. I don't keep it right next to the podium, just as a spatial, area kind of thing.
Have you ever used the harmony director?
No.
I haven't either. I'm very interested.
No.
Well, we've sort of hit on the topics that we were planning on. Jeff or Dean, are there things that we have not talked about that you'd like to bring up before we close?
No, I think Dean's been very thorough.
Oh, the only thing I noticed in my bullet, we kind of talked about intonation, tone. You mentioned actually, Kyle, at one point, like our singing tone relative to our playing tone. You can take them through different vowels, and you can and e, and if you just can keep working at ooh and different vowel shapes, I think it does help them connect with how they sound on their instrument as well. And it helps to deal with placing of the tongue, opening up the throat. So that idea of when you do these exercises, you can change vowel sounds to even talk about how it might change their tone on a particular piece. If you're like, oh, no, we're playing this piece and it really needs to be played with a darker, warmer kind of tone. Well, what would that sound like with regard to vowels that we would use? If we want this to be really bright and we're going to have a little bit of edge here, what does that sound like to you? Just in your head, make that sound, vocally. So I think that's the last bit that I had bulleted that I wanted to mention, but everything else I think covered in really great detail.
I will say, Dean, if people are hearing this and they would like to reach out to you maybe for some individual advice, I'm sure that you'd be willing to help them, or in helping, solve problems in their own groups, or to clarify anything that you've said. Is there an easy way that they could connect with you?
Yeah, absolutely. They feel free to reach out for sure. My personal email is dnealteaches, dnealteaches@gmail.com. So they can reach me through email and touch base with me, and anything that I can do to help out would be, I'd be more than happy to.
Well, that's fantastic. We really appreciate you having here, everybody. Big round of applause for Dean Neal. Thank you, Dean, so much, and enjoy your summer.
Thanks, Kyle. Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you for listening to the Growing Band Director podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to help spread the word, please give us a 5-star review and tell your band director friends to subscribe too. We're available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, our YouTube channel, and wherever you listen to podcasts. Also, if you have the time, we highly recommend the After Sectionals podcast for more great listening. Thank you for listening to The Growing Band Director. See you next week.